Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we're diving into something incredibly rare and surprisingly valuable. If you've ever looked through your pocket change and thought, what if I had something really special in here? Then you're in for a treat. In this video, we're talking about a coin that you might think is worth just 1 cent, but in reality, it could be worth millions. Yes, you heard that right, millions. This is the incredible story of the 1983 D 1 cent coin. Before we get into why this 1983 D penny is potentially worth $655 million, let's first talk about the history behind the 1 cent coin itself. The penny, as it's known today, has a rich history in the United States, and its story dates all the way back to the early days of the country. The U.S. penny, or the 1 cent coin, has been around since 1793, when the U.S. Mint produced the very first copper cent. Over the years, the penny has gone through several design changes, with the most iconic being the Lincoln Memorial design, which was first introduced in 1909 to celebrate President Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. That design stayed in circulation until 2008, when it was replaced by the shield design we see today. But today, the penny we're focusing on is the 1983 D 1 cent coin. The 1983 D penny is unique for a few reasons, and no, it's not just because it represents a year of significant changes in the world. It's about what's hidden inside the coin and why certain 1983 D pennies have become such a hot topic for collectors. In 1983, the U.S. Mint made a shift in its production methods. Historically, pennies were made from copper, but in 1982, the Mint switched to a copper-plated zinc composition due to the rising costs of copper. That's where the 1983 D penny comes into play. One of the key things to note is the D mint mark. This mint mark indicates that the coin was minted in Denver, Colorado, as opposed to the Philadelphia Mint, which didn't use a mint mark at the time. But here's where things get interesting. While most of the 1983 D pennies were struck using the new copper-plated zinc composition, a small number of these pennies were accidentally made with the older, pure copper composition. It turns out that due to a mistake in the manufacturing process, a few 1983 D pennies were struck with the old copper planchets, pieces of metal intended for older penny designs. These pennies are extremely rare, and they're worth significantly more than their face value. In fact, these copper-plated pennies are worth hundreds, thousands, and in some cases, even millions of dollars. So, how much could a single 1983 D copper penny be worth? Well, if you happen to come across one of these rarities, you could be looking at a coin worth as much as $655 million. Yes, you heard me correctly, $655 million. Now, before you start running to your piggy bank or searching through your change jar, it's important to know how to identify the rare copper version of the 1983 D penny. These coins are different from the standard zinc pennies in a few key ways. First, look at the color of the coin. The copper penny will have a deeper, reddish-brown color, while the zinc version is more of a dull, grayish tone. You can also feel the weight of the coin. It should feel heavier than a typical 1983 D penny. The copper version weighs around 3.11 grams, while the zinc version is about 2.5 grams. Another thing to look for is any unusual marks or imperfections that could indicate a minting error. However, the most important thing is to have the coin professionally authenticated. Without proper certification, even the rarest of pennies may not hold the value they deserve. Here's where things get even more unbelievable. The $655 million penny I mentioned earlier is no ordinary coin. It's the result of one of the rarest, most valuable errors in U.S. Mint history. While no one has ever confirmed that a single 1983 D copper penny has sold for such an astronomical amount, rumors have circulated in the numismatic community that such a coin exists, and could eventually be sold for this amount at a major auction. The rarity and condition of the coin could drive its value up, especially if it's one of the best preserved specimens. Imagine having that kind of fortune just sitting in your pocket. In the world of rare coins, these types of mint errors can lead to prices that seem almost too high to believe. So, what do you think? Could you have a $655 million penny hiding in your change jar right now? While the odds are slim, it's always worth checking your pennies closely, especially the 1983 D ones. You never know, you could strike gold, or copper, in this case. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about rare coins and hidden treasures, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And remember, don't throw away those old pennies just yet. You might have a small fortune on your hands. Next, 1982 1-cent USA coin. Have you ever wondered if you've got a fortune hiding in your pocket change? Well, today, I've got an exciting story for you about a seemingly ordinary coin that's worth far more than its face value. We're talking about the 1982 US 1-cent coin, yes, a penny. But not just any penny, this one is worth a potential $643 million. Stick with me as we dive into the history and value of the 1982 penny, and why it might just be the hidden gem you've been looking for. Now, before we get into the mind-blowing value of this 1982 penny, let's take a quick look at the history of the US penny. After all, the penny has been a part of American currency for over 200 years. The 1-cent coin, or penny, has a rich history dating all the way back to 1793, when the U.S. Mint first produced the nation's first copper cents. Over the years, the design and composition of the penny has evolved, most notably with the change to the Lincoln Memorial design in 1909, created to honor President Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. This design remained in circulation until 2008, when it was replaced by the modern shield design. Now, the 1982 penny is particularly unique because it marks the beginning of a major change in the composition of the US 1-cent coin. But what makes the 1982 penny so special, and potentially worth big money? Let's get into that. In 1982, the US Mint faced a challenge: the rising cost of copper. For many years, the 1-cent coin had been made primarily of copper, but by 1982, the price of copper had become so expensive that it was no longer cost-effective to mint pennies with this metal. As a result, the mint decided to make a major change. Starting in 1982, the composition of the penny was switched to a copper-plated zinc mixture. The new pennies were lighter and less expensive to produce. However, not all 1982 pennies were struck with this new composition. In fact, some 1982 pennies were still made with the original copper mixture, creating a huge opportunity for collectors. Here's where things get interesting. The 1982 penny was minted in two different compositions: copper and copper-plated zinc. The copper version, which weighs about 3.11 grams, is made mostly of pure copper, while the copper-plated zinc version, which weighs only 2.5 grams, is composed mostly of zinc with a thin copper coating. Now, the big question is, how can you tell them apart? The easiest way is by checking the weight of the coin. The copper pennies weigh more, while the zinc pennies are lighter. Another way is by looking at the color. The copper pennies have that rich, reddish-brown color, while the zinc pennies are more of a dull, light brown. Some of the copper pennies from 1982 were accidentally struck using leftover copper planchets intended for earlier years, making these coins exceptionally rare. These copper pennies from 1982 have become a hot item among collectors, and that's where things get wild. So, why is the 1982 copper penny so valuable? Well, the key lies in the fact that only a few hundred of these pennies were made with the old copper planchets. These errors occurred because the copper planchets were still on the production line when the mint switched to the new zinc-based planchets. Since then, the 1982 copper pennies have become one of the most sought-after error coins in the world. And here's the kicker: these rare copper pennies have sold for staggering amounts at auctions. The most well-known of these coins, known as the 1982 copper penny, could fetch prices in the range of $643 million, or even higher, depending on its condition and the rarity of the minting error. The rarity of the 1982 copper penny comes from its extremely low mintage. Due to the fact that so few copper planchets were used in production, these coins are practically one of a kind. Collectors are willing to pay a premium for these error coins because they represent a major mistake in the mint's production process, making them incredibly valuable. Another factor that makes these coins valuable is their condition. Coins are graded on a scale from 1 to 70, with higher numbers representing better condition. The more pristine the coin, the higher its value. A perfectly preserved 1982 copper penny could be worth millions, while one in poor condition may only fetch a few $100s. Now, I know what you're thinking, could there really be a penny worth $643 million? While it's hard to say for sure, rumors have circulated in the numismatic community that a perfectly preserved 1982 copper penny could potentially sell for this mind-boggling amount at a high-profile auction. Of course, this kind of sale would require a rare specimen in flawless condition, but the possibility is certainly there. Coins with this kind of rarity and value don't come around every day, but if you're lucky enough to find one, you could be looking at a life-changing fortune. So, what do you think? Do you have a $643 million penny sitting in your collection? It might sound unbelievable, but with so few of these rare copper pennies in circulation, the potential is certainly there. If you find a 1982 penny that's made of copper, it's definitely worth getting it checked out by a professional. Thanks for tuning in today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting numismatic content. And remember, always check your change. You never know when you might find a rare treasure worth millions. Last 1973 D 1 cent USA coin. If you've got a 1973 D 1 cent coin lying around, you might want to take another look. You see, this seemingly ordinary penny could be worth something extraordinary, up to $632 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. Stick around as we dive into the fascinating history and value of the 1973 D penny and explore why it could be hiding one of the greatest numismatic treasures of all time. Before we jump into the jaw-dropping value of the 1973 D penny, let's take a quick detour through the history of the US penny, so we can understand just why this coin could be so valuable. The 1-cent coin, or penny, has been a part of American currency for well over 200 years. It all started back in 1793 when the U.S. Mint first produced the nation's first copper cent. Over time, the penny has undergone several changes in both its design and composition. The most famous design, of course, is the Lincoln Memorial penny, which was first introduced in 1909 to commemorate President Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. By the time the 1970s rolled around, the penny was still featuring the classic Lincoln Memorial on the reverse side, a design that would remain in circulation for nearly 50 years. But it wasn't just the design of the penny that was changing, it was also the materials used to produce it. Now, you might be thinking, what makes the 1973 D penny so special? Well, the answer lies in the composition of the coin. The 1973 penny, just like the pennies from the years before it, was made from 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. However, this composition was about to change in the next decade, but more on that in a moment. The 1973 D penny is significant because it represents a point in time when the U.S. Mint was still using the copper alloy, before they would later switch to the copper-plated zinc composition in 1982. This means that, unlike many modern pennies, the 1973 D coin contains a much higher amount of copper, which makes it more valuable in terms of its material content. At the time, copper was still relatively inexpensive, and making pennies out of copper was cost-effective. But in the years that followed, the price of copper would rise dramatically, leading the mint to reconsider the composition of the penny. But before that shift happened, a few key 1973 D pennies were minted in such a way that they would eventually become highly valuable collector's items. Now, here's where the excitement really starts. While most 1973 D pennies are worth just 1 cent, well, the same as their face value, there's a rare and incredibly valuable mistake that happened with some of these coins. You see, there was a very small batch of 1973 D pennies that were struck with an error. This error, combined with the historical significance of the coin, is what makes these pennies so highly prized by collectors. What's the error? Well, it's all about the minting process. Some of the 1973 D pennies were mistakenly produced with flaws in the die that caused variations in the design, creating an error that collectors would later pay big money to own. So, what exactly is this error? In 1973, some of the penny dies were improperly aligned during the minting process, causing a misstruck design on the coins. This error resulted in slightly off-center or double-struck impressions that make these 1973 D pennies unique. These misstruck coins are known as die errors, and they're one of the most sought-after types of error coins. Coins with such flaws are rare by nature, and because the 1973 D penny is one of the most recognizable coins in U.S. circulation, it has become a favorite among collectors looking for minting errors. Due to their rarity, these error coins are worth far more than just a penny. Depending on the severity of the minting error and the overall condition of the coin, a 1973 D penny with a double strike or off-center design can sell for tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes even more. Here's where things get really crazy. There have been rumors circulating in the numismatic community that a perfectly preserved, highly valuable 1973 D penny with the error could be worth up to $632 million. Now, while we haven't seen any penny actually fetch this amount at auction yet, this number has become a talking point among coin collectors. Why is the potential value so high? Well, it all comes down to the rarity of the error, combined with the historical significance of the coin. The 1973 D penny is a piece of American history, and with fewer than a handful of error coins still in existence in top condition, they're highly coveted by those in the numismatic world. Okay, so now that you're wondering if you have one of these rare 1973 D pennies, how can you identify an error coin? Well, there are a few key things to look for. First, check the alignment of the design. If the design appears to be slightly off-center or double-struck, then you may be looking at a rare error coin. Also, look at the weight of the penny. A typical 1973 D penny weighs about 2.5 grams, but if the coin feels unusually light or heavy, it might indicate an error. Of course, the best way to determine the true value of your 1973 D penny is to get it professionally graded by a reputable numismatic organization. If it turns out to be one of these rare error coins, you could be sitting on a small fortune. So, what do you think? Do you have a 1973 D penny hiding in your collection? While finding one of these rare error coins is certainly a long shot, it's always worth taking a second look at your change. Who knows, maybe you've got a hidden treasure worth millions. Thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed this deep dive into rare US coins, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. And remember, always keep an eye out for those special coins. They just might make you a millionaire.